Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Goatman horror stories. First story. I think I'm a Goatman. I know this sounds insane, and I am not sure how to explain my situation, to be completely honest. I have been lurking on here for around 10 years now, and have seen the crazy experiences other people have described. I was always particularly drawn in by stories about skinwalkers and Goatman. They sounded terrifying, and I sympathized with those who had encountered such entities. I had an experience of my own last night, however, which has left me unsure as to exactly whom I sympathize with more. I live in a very small town in Scotland, surrounded by woodland and hills, the River Tweed, and many, many fields. As you can probably imagine, much of the time my friends and I spend together is spent in nature. Not because we are particularly outdoorsy, but more because out here, one can't really escape nature. We, as a group, like to build campfires and cook burgers and the like on those disposable barbecues you can buy in the supermarket. It's nice out under the stars, laughing, having a drink, and eating good food. There's a group of regulars. We have known each other since school and are now in our late 20s, consisting of myself. I'm Jen, Cameron, Kev, Fern, Evan, Ross, and Kirsty. Last night, the 7 of us decided over group message that we were going to build a fire up one of the hills on the town. This hill is covered in woodland, civilization ending at its base, tall trees and rabbits. Possibly the occasional deer, the only company someone would have should they get lost up there. We knew our way around, though, and at 11 p.m., after a healthy pregame at Cameron's house, my friends and I grabbed our blankets, our beers, and our barbecue and headed up the hill. It was dark, and we were happy, gabbing away about our days, our weeks, our lives. On the way up, I was lagging. I was only half listening to the conversations going on in front of me, because I had noticed some strange sounds accompanying the usual whoops and wails of the various woodland critters. There was a new sound, incredibly like an owl's hoot, but slightly odd in the way it carried on for a good 5 minutes continuously, one hoot just lasting all that time, like the drone of a bagpipe. The way the sound dipped and peaked was strange as well, I remember. So, there I am, absent-mindedly puffing my way up this hill behind my friends, when my arm brushes painfully against something very sharp. I stumbled as I whirled around, but it was only a branch, about head height but drooping, and I had brushed against its pointy, antler-esque end. I started to wipe off the blood with the sleeve of my coat, and I noticed that there was a pair of eyes peering at me from slightly underneath and behind the offending branches. I jumped back, startled, the back of my foot landing unevenly and causing me to spill onto the forest floor, alerting my friend to come to my aid. I looked back up towards where I'd seen the eyes, but they were gone. I found something incredibly strange about the fact that the branches that had hurt me had also disappeared. Kev offered me a hand, which I took, and he tugged me to my feet. I brushed myself off to the sounds of my friends laughing and saying things like lightweight and you must be a cheap date. I laughed with them, gave them the finger, and we headed back on our way in search of the ultimate site for the fire. We found said site a few minutes later and set down our stuff. It took us about 10 minutes to lay out our blankets the way we liked, and then my friends headed towards the woods in search of firewood. I explained that I was still bleeding and a little shaken from my poke and fall on our way up, and told them I would clean myself up and wait for them here. After various eye rolls and nudges, they left on their mission. About 5 minutes later, having cleaned off my wound and gathered myself, I sat down to wait for my friends and begin building the fire with the few twigs I found scattered around where I was sitting. The first to arrive back were Cameron and Fern, who were an item and who I suspect had been off connecting instead of gathering, as they returned with not much in the way of wood. I made a cheeky remark, wrong kind of wood guys, but they didn't respond. They kept giggling to each other as they perched on a fluffy blanket and commenced kissing. I figured they hadn't heard me and were just distracted, and turned my attention to Evan, who was stumbling out of the trees, branches and leaves tumbling over his arms as he hauled his far larger pile back to us. "You got loads," I said as I sat down next to where he was adding his firewood onto the small pile I had created. Again, I was paid no mind, and I started to get frustrated. Ross, Kirsty, and Kev returned with the last of our fire building materials, and they were chatting amongst themselves. Hey, what should we eat first? I'm going to get dinner started, I asked the group. No one responded or even looked my way. They were clearly taking the piss, and so I sat down and huddled around the now glowing fire, which Cameron had taken a break from his makeout session to build, folding my arms in a mock huff. No one noticed that either. I let it go, figuring that my friends were a little bitter that I hadn't gathered my fair share of wood, especially since I had made fun of Cameron Fern's stash, but that they would get bored if I showed no reaction to their little game. I had been beaten to chef duty by Ross, who had started to cook the burgers. Nobody spoke to me the entire time Ross was cooking, so still I sat, ignored and ignoring, the delicious smell of cooked meats making my mouth water as I waited patiently for the game to be over and the feast to be ready. If I had to pinpoint the moment things started to go downhill, this is the part of my story I would choose. I noticed that some of the others had begun to look at me strangely, their expressions going from confused to startled and settling on afraid. I heard small whispers between them. Who is that? And I don't know, how long has she been there? This was unsettling, to say the least. I spoke up, it's me. Jen, what the foo? But something was seriously wrong with my voice and stopped me mid-protest. My voice had come out wrong, like it was mingled with an animal sound. It was too elongated. That's the only word I can think of that possibly describes the sound. My voice hooped and warped and took too long to say a given word. It was like the owl I had been mesmerized by earlier in the night. My friends dropped whatever they had been doing and started to back away from me. I tried to walk with them, but my movements felt stuttered, creaky, shuddering. I looked down at my legs, and when I looked back up, I found that despite my slow, unproductive movements, I had somehow overtaken the others and was now further back in the woods. I turned around to face where I could hear them gasping, Fern and Kirsty sobbing, and try to shout to them. My voice came out a strangled screech, still humanish and still in English, but it scared even me. My friends turned and ran. I struggled to walk back to the campfire and picked up my phone, which I had left on the ground where I had been sitting. I opened the group messaging app we had used, but found that the group message had disappeared, a notification alerting me to the fact that I was not in the chat anymore. I opened my phone book, thinking that surely I could call one of my friends to explain who I was, but there were no contacts. I frantically opened other apps, social media apps. They all asked me to create an account. I had no presence, no photos and pictures app, no contacts. I had been erased. My friends didn't recognize me, and I couldn't walk or speak properly. I felt like I was in a nightmare, but everything was too real. It took me what felt like forever, although my clock app was still working and told me it had only taken me 3 minutes to make the 3-mile journey home. I panicked as I walked, repeatedly opening the same apps and checking and rechecking my phone book. When I finally got home, thankfully I still had my keys, I ran to my laptop. The same thing had happened. The only thing I could access was Reddit. So here I am. I have come to explain that I still feel like me, and hopefully my friends will see this and understand. I am not a monster. They don't recognize me, but I was real. I was a person. I don't know what I am now. I think I'm a Goatman. Second story, The Witch of Goat Mountain. The forests of the Pacific Northwest abound with stories of ghosts, ghouls, and various other beasts. But in the small mountain town where I grew up, our local legend was the Witch of Goat Mountain. As children, my friends and I were always out exploring the woods and freaking each other out with the different games we used to play. I remember often finding weird things like bones stacked neatly in strange formations with the skull of a deer in the middle, antlers still attached. On other occasions, I would hear beautiful singing in the distance. The words sounded sweet to my young ears, and I felt oddly drawn to them. I felt like I desperately needed to find whoever was singing that lovely tune. I never did, though. I always had this strange gnawing in my gut that I needed to get away from there fast. My dad's friends, who were avid hunters, would often come over and share strange experiences they had had while hunting. One of them mentioned being in a tree stand in the early morning hours and seeing a woman walking through the forest wearing a black cloak. She was just casually walking through the trees about 50 yards in front of me. He was saying, and at first I thought it was a tweaker who had wandered out in the woods and gotten lost or something, so I called out to her. And as soon as I did that, she stopped and turned to face me. I can't be sure of what I saw next because it still wasn't fully light outside, but I swear it looked like she had the legs of a goat or horse or something. She stood facing me for a few minutes, then casually walked out of sight. It startled me pretty bad, and I haven't been out there since. Despite all the strange occurrences and stories, my childhood continued as normal. That is until my best friend Brandon disappeared. It was a warm, sunny day, and we were out in the woods playing hide and seek. It was Brandon's turn to hide when suddenly, as I was getting ready to go find him, I heard this singing. "Brandon," I called out, feeling a little uneasy now. "Brandon, I think we should go home now." But there was no answer. I decided that he must be ignoring me and would probably jump out from behind some tree at any moment. But he never did. At that moment, I heard his voice crying in the distance. It was very faint and muffled, but I clearly heard the words, "Help, Brandon," I screamed. "Where are you?" I spent the next 2 hours searching for him in a dazed panic. This can't be real. This can't be real. I kept telling myself, like saying the words enough times would wake me up from some terrible nightmare. Finally, exhausted and crying, after finding nothing but one of his shoes, I gave up my search and returned home. It was dark when I reached my parents' doorstep, and they were furious, but also relieved when they saw me. "Where on earth have you been?" My mother shrieked. "How many times have we told you not to be out playing after dark? You could have been killed." Brandon's parent called and said he hasn't come home yet, said my father. "Where have you two been?" "I'm sorry," I cried. "I don't know what happened to him. We were playing hide and seek, and he disappeared. All I found was this." I sobbed and held up Brandon's shoe. My parents looked very alarmed by this and told me to remain in my room for the rest of the night. I lay down on my bed and passed out from sheer exhaustion, only to be awoken at about 11 p.m. to the sound of my parents talking. "This is just like the Burton's boy," said my mom. "I know," came the voice of my father. "Gone without a trace. The police are looking for Brandon as we speak. Maybe they'll have some luck with this case." Who was the Burton's boy? This had happened more than once. Was someone trying to get me too? It was all too much for my young mind to handle, and I once again fell into an uncomfortable sleep filled with nightmares and the screams of my friend. I woke up several times throughout the night in a cold sweat, and I swear I could hear the sound of a woman singing outside my window. Years have gone by now, and the case has since gone cold. Search and rescue teams searched for miles and miles after Brandon's initial disappearance, but in the end turned up with nothing. I am now fully grown with a family of my own, and about a month ago, we decided to stay at my parents' house for a couple days so the kids could see Grandpa and Grandma. I was down in the basement going through some of my old childhood belongings when I noticed what looked like a trapdoor that had been hidden under some boxes. I was baffled. All those years I had lived here, but never knew about any secret doors in the basement. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to go down and check it out. The trapdoor opened with a loud creak, and I climbed down an old rickety ladder that led down into its depths. I immediately found the light switch and flipped it on. I was standing in a small room with several workbenches covered with saws, knives, and power tools. But something else caught my eye. It was an old tape recorder. I picked it up and clicked the play button, but as soon as I did, I was gripped with absolute horror. It was the sound of the woman singing that beautiful music I had heard as a child. But only now did I realize that the woman I heard singing all those years ago was my mother. "It's not possible," I said aloud. I began going through drawers and cabinets, only to confirm my greatest fears. They were all filled with children's clothes. I began to retch at what I saw next. It was the pair of shoes Brandon had been wearing when he disappeared. Third story. Count the people. In 1979, my dad was 16 years old. He grew up in southern Arkansas near Spavinaw Creek deep in the country. He knew that land better than he knew anything, but my grandmother was still hesitant when he asked to go camping at the creek for the weekend with his friends from the other farms around the area. After much deliberation, my grandmother finally agreed. That weekend, he and his friends packed up and headed to the creek. The group was made up of 9 teenage boys, ages 13 to 17. When they got there, they spent the day fishing and playing games. It started to get dark, so they started a fire. The sun went down, and it got so dark that my dad could no longer really see the faces of those around him. He looked around the fire and began trying to identify his friends. He could hardly see. He figured out who most of them were, but he was confused by the number of people around the fire. He counted himself, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He counted again and again, trying to determine whether he had accidentally counted someone twice. After counting over and over, he began to panic. Who is this extra person sitting with us around the fire? He thought. He didn't know how to tell his friends. He was afraid that whoever or whatever was with him around the fire would be set off by his telling the group and hurt them. Count the people, he finally said to his friends. They all muttered, "What? What are you talking about?" Confused by him, disrupting the conversation to say this random sentence. "Count the people," he insisted loudly. They sat there in silence for a few seconds. They realized what he was saying. They all jumped up and sprinted away from the fire. After about 15 minutes, they all made their way back to the fire. They all came back safe. None of them ever found out who or what was around that fire with them. But to this day, when my family goes camping with my dad's childhood friends, I can see them all looking around the fire and counting the people. Fourth story. Monster I carried out of the woods. I found a monster in the woods. Every year, I spend a week in the woods alone. I cannot stand being inside my empty house on the anniversary of when I lost everything important in my life. The walls close in on me, and I feel suffocated. So I go to the woods. I sleep, drink, and try to shoot at least one deer. On the second day of my trip, I was walking through the forest in damp weather, feeling miserable when I came across it. A creature hanging by its foot from a tree. I panicked when I first saw the figure strung up in the tree and rushed forward, hoping if it was a person I could still help. As I got closer, I saw that even though its body was similar to a human, all the proportions looked wrong. The legs far too long and skinny. The stomach sunken in, ribcage visible, making it seem like it had no muscle mass or fat. I stopped below the creature, staring up at it in disbelief of what I was seeing. One foot was stuck inside a bear trap that was attached to a chain, hooked over a branch. Its entire body was hanging from a torn and bloody ankle snared inside the trap. Wrists tied together and arms so long they nearly reached the ground as they dangled past its head. The creature's face was covered by a blank wooden oval with moss spilling out from it. At first, I was certain it was dead. As I got closer, I saw the chest rise weakly, as if let out small, wheezing breaths from under the mask. Even without seeing what was under the mask, I knew this thing wasn't human. The woods had a bad reputation of people going missing. Most didn't like camping overnight inside the forest anymore. It was a good place to fish and hunt, but not to stay the night. I had my hunting rifle with me. I could put it out of its misery, but just left it alone. Someone put this thing here. They might be back for it. Misty rain came down, and I could see puff of my breath in the terrible weather. My feet cold and fingers stiff. It would get dark in a few hours. I should go back to my camp and get dry, or else I would get sick. Or leave this damned forest before any more of these creatures came for me. Instead, I did something only an insane person would. I placed my gear on the ground to climb the tree to get the creature down. It was the middle of the night when the creature stirred. I treated the wounds the best I could. Getting the bear trap off without cutting my hand took almost an hour to do. Dragging the lanky thing back to camp wore me out, and I still needed to dry the creature off and wrap up its wounds. The damn thing better appreciate what I did for it. While I waited for it to wake up, I sat by the fire, sitting under a tarp to keep dry. I let the monster I'd dragged back use my tent, keeping the flap open, so I could keep an eye on it. I was dead tired, but Didn't want to fall asleep with whatever the thing was close by to eat me in my sleep. Its limbs were so long, I had to fold them to make sure it fit inside my small tent. At some point in the middle of the night, I heard movement in my tent. Slowly a hand came out, long fingers testing the damp ground. I couldn't see the thing's expression because of the mask and moss covering its entire head. Even while it slept, I didn't dare look what it really looked like. I remained still, wrapped up in my spare blanket. If it attacked, I could shoot it, but I didn't even reach for my rifle. Half of the creature's body came out of the tent, body freezing up when it sensed me nearby. The next few seconds were tense. Neither of us moved, waiting for the other to act first. I'd hoped this would be a treat and release process, that when this creature woke up, it would just go back off into the woods. I was not so lucky. It made the choice to attack the easy target. Darting forward, it cleared the distance between us quickly. I was knocked over, thing bony hands pinning me down to the ground. The mask flipped up so fast, I never saw what was underneath. Sharp teeth grabbed a hold of my jacket and started to shake it, tearing the fabric but not reaching my skin. The attack didn't last very long. I was fully ready to accept my death in that moment. After all, I had nothing waiting for me outside of that forest. If I could become food, at least my death would mean something. But this creature didn't even give me that. It stopped, releasing my coat, and staggered back. Collapsing on its side, it let out ragged, wheezing breaths. It used up all its strength in that thin body. I watched it, wondering what to do next. I grabbed a blanket from my tent, trying to wrap it up to keep the creature warm. It weakly pushed my hands away, sharp claws catching my coat, but not tearing it. Wrapping the thing very much like a burrito, I went about getting it back inside the tent. I couldn't see the creature's expression, but I could sense how annoyed my new campmate was being manhandled and wrapped up. Until it regained some strength, it would need to accept some help. I went back outside, wrapped myself in my own blanket again, and stared back into the weak fire. I planned on staying up all night, but I drifted between sleep until dawn came. Out in the trees, I heard sounds, as if someone was walking around in the dark just beyond my camp. Fear fluttered in my stomach. I was out in the open, exhausted from the cold weather. I didn't mind death, but I was still afraid of whatever was stalking around in the night. When morning arrived, I looked around the camp to find someone or something had in fact been circling my camp. Muddy tracks and broken twigs gave me enough evidence of being watched. I wondered if it was more of those creatures waiting to grab the injured on inside the tent. At least I lived through one night so far. My new guest was out of the tent when I got back to camp. It wrapped in a blanket glaring at me from under the mask. I could feel the eyes on me, even if I couldn't see them. I needed to think of what to do next. I could just pack up and leave. I doubted these things would follow me into the city. It still wasn't healed up and wouldn't be able to protect itself if whoever hung it up came back. Trying to get the creature to eat, it had no interest in the hot dogs and marshmallows I brought. It was a little surreal seeing a lanky creature like it in the dim gray morning light. This thing wasn't human, and yet I was helping it for reasons I didn't know. Aside from people, this thing might eat other meat. If I could shoot some game, maybe a good meal would help it gain some strength back. And maybe for all my trouble, I would be eaten in the end. Only time would tell how thankful this thing would be for all the help. I didn't want to go off into the forest hunting alone. If another person came across my camp, I didn't want them to come across my monster. One of them would end up dead if that happened. I paced trying to think of what to do. As if it could sense my train of thought, the lanky creature bundled the blanket, putting it inside the tent to stay dry. Then it climbed up my back, lanky limbs wrapping around me. My skin crawled and stood, back bent trying to support the sudden weight change. I waited for the attack that never came. We just awkwardly stood there waiting on each other to do something. I could go hunting if I carried the creature on my back. It would take longer than normal, but could be done. Picking up my rifle and small pack, I started off into the trees, still really creeped out by the thing that I decided to help. At least it wasn't trying to eat me. I really needed to call the creature on my back something. Naming things was difficult. I went through at least 100 while sneaking through the woods, try to pick up on any game tracks. I didn't know what it was beside not human. Skinwalker and Wendigo just didn't suit what it was from what I've heard about them. No legends or cryptid name felt right. Soon I found myself not caring if I had the name of its species. I doubted humans even came across them often enough to give it a name. I was startled out of my thoughts when I came right up on a deer. A decent-sized buck that should have run before I even got this close. Holding my breath, I froze, hand on my rifle. Careful to make as little noise as possible, I raised my weapon to get my shot lined up. For a moment, I wondered what I was doing was even right. This thing I was taking care of could be evil. The missing person cases was a hint towards that. Then again, it might just be a part of nature. Killing a deer to feed the creature wouldn't be wrong if this is what happened in the woods without me interfering. I shot twice for good measure. The buck fell with a grunt of surprise. The thing on my back dropped to the ground, moving like liquid. It sulked towards the fallen creature, masked face darting around as if it expected something was going to swoop in and take its food. While watching it eat, I decided on a name in the worst way possible. I've seen videos of what a fox sound like. Those nightmare screeches and sound were the same kind this creature made while it tore into the deer and ate. Because its back was turned to me, I never saw its face. Just the fact the mask was lifted so it could bite and tear off chunks of flesh. Fox felt like a suitable name for the monster I'd taken in. Fox, I said mostly to myself, trying the name out. The creature slightly turned at my voice, letting me see a human-looking mouth, but filled with bloody sharp teeth. I think he liked the name. Fox ate through the entire deer with insane speed. Even after devouring through pounds of meat, he was still skinny enough for me to see his rib cage. It was a mystery where he put it all. Gathering up the larger bones, he followed behind me back to the camp. At least he could walk now, although limping and trailing behind. He crawling mostly on all fours, even though he was holding bones in his hands. I led him to the river first, so he could get cleaned up in the cold water, and I refilled some of my bottles to boil later. When we arrived back at camp, Fox gnawed on a rib, while reluctantly letting me look at his injured ankle. It healed so much I knew he would be fine by tonight or tomorrow. Watching him chew through his bone stash, I wondered yet again what I was doing. Not only did I not leave him to die, I'd named him. There was something seriously wrong with me if I could get attached to a creature like this. You can eat me, you know. I told him, not knowing if he knew what I was saying. Fox looked over at my voice, but didn't pause in his gnawing. Bone under his moss blanket covering his face. Strangely enough, I wasn't scared of him. I'd already accepted my death for a while now. If he wanted to eat me next, I would almost welcome it. The rest of the day, I let him wander around camp, and I kept the fire going and took a few short naps to catch up on sleep. When night fell, the fear of death finally came to me. I was inside the tent, while Fox stayed beside the fire. I'd heard noises from outside and carefully crawled out from my sleeping bag to try and see the source. It sounded like a few people walking just outside where the firelight could reach. Fox tensed up, looking ready to attack if needed. I found my rifle, taking it into my hand as silently as I could. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I could faintly see forms similar to Fox moving around in the trees. There was more of whatever he was in this forest. I stood waiting for them to make a move, rifle pointing downward. I didn't want to shoot one if they only showed up to pick up a missing member of their pack. One was brave enough to poke its head into the light. It was low to the ground, lanky elbows pointing up. It also had a blank wooden mask, but it had a mane of tangles, branches covering the upper half of its body. For a second, I thought I spotted glowing eyes inside that heap of woods staring daggers at me. Well, go on, I whispered to Fox, trying to encourage him to go and rejoin his group. Almost like cats, they got closer to each other on all fours, backs arched, studying and doing a half circle around each other. Other creatures appeared, watching the exchange, each having a mask of wood with some sort of pile of forest debris covering their faces. Some stood on two legs, making them almost 8 feet tall, other on all four, ready to swiftly run forward if startled. It looked like it was going well. Fox got closer to the other creature and reached a clawed hand over as a gesture I didn't understand. In a blink of an eye, they both flew into a flurry of motion. Horrible hissing and garbling cries came from the tangled pair, thrashing, trying to kill each other. My heart sank, and a pit of black fear opened up my stomach. Fox healed up a bit since he was with me, but he wasn't strong enough to fight off the newcomer, let alone all the ones in the woods watching. I accepted I would die, but I was not able to let Fox die with me. I lifted my rifle and aimed it away from the fight. I fired it off into the woods, aiming at nothing. I hoped the sound would make them stop, and it worked. The one creature stopped to look around for the sound. Fox kicked the other aside and scrambled to me as I ran over and stood between him and the other pale form. The newcomer was covered in scratches dripping in blood. Fox looked worse, his arm broken and countless cuts on his thin body from the brief fight. Getting between them, I received a fast, long cut to my arm, but it was nothing compared to what Fox went through. I pointed the rifle towards the monster on all fours, ready to fire if needed. It stared at me from behind that faceless mask. The other creatures didn't move. I heard Fox shuffling around behind me, but I didn't turn to see what he was doing. When the other creature turned its head away from me to watch Fox, I finally did the same. He'd taken off the faceless wooden mask from his hood of moss and tossed it into the fire in front of all of us. Though it gave off a high-pitched, shrieking sound, as if it was an animal dying. Black flames shot up, spewing into the sky for a few seconds until the noise died down. The mask was burned up completely. Fox sat next to the fire, nursing his bad arm. Slowly, the creatures around us started to leave one by one until the one that attacked Fox remained. It sat, blood dripping from its wounds. Finally, it too turned and left us. My arm bleeding and rifle feeling heavy. Dropping my weapon, I collapsed to my knees. Caring about someone else was beyond stressful. White-hot pain started to come through my body from my cut. I found my arm was too heavy to move to see how deep the wound was. Tried to stand my legs, suddenly refused to work. Not knowing why, I fainted into a deep sleep I didn't awake from until it was morning. When I opened my eyes, I was inside my tent on my side. My arm out front of me, so I could see the wound was stuffed with moss. I felt hot and too weak to move or do anything at all. I couldn't even move my fingers. Pain came in waves as I tried to ignore it. Focusing on anything but the throbbing in my arm, I listened to the pattering or rain outside. The light was gray and impossible to tell what time it was. The tent flap opened, letting cool air and misty rain come inside the tent. Fox must have been the one to put me in here, but he didn't know how zippers worked. My energy fading, I fell asleep again. The next few days I knew I was dying. Whatever got into my cut was nasty. That creature easily being able to kill with one strike of its claws. I slept most of the time, far too weak and feverish to move. Fox would keep me hydrated by lifting my head to let me drink from my steel water bottle I brought along. But the water tasted muddy. He was getting it from the river, not knowing to boil it. His efforts might just kill me faster. In my fever dreams, I was tormented by the truth that haunted my every waking hour. The reason why I wanted death so badly, even though I was too much of a coward to do it myself. I wasn't there to hear the car accident, but was still plagued by the sounds. My mind repeated the sound of the officer knocking on my door at 4 in the morning to awkwardly tell me the news. His first time saying such tragic words to another person, and I knew it was all my fault. 5 years ago, I cheated on my wife. A one-night fling, I did not have a good reason aside from I just felt like it. I told her knowing I would be unable to hide it. She very understandably got upset and left the house to her brother's place 4 blocks away. They both drank and insulted me, something I rightfully deserved. To this day, I don't know why they decided to drive back home that night. She was too drunk to drive, but her brother thought he was fine. It was only 4 blocks away from our home, and yet they got into a 3-car pileup from people leaving the bar for the night. Everyone in my wife's car died that night. Everyone else in the other cars were lucky enough to receive injuries they could recover from. 3 people died: my wife, her brother, and our daughter in the back seat of the car. I went to sleep when she left and wasn't even aware she took our daughter to her brother's place with her. All because I made one decision to go home with a woman I thought was attractive. A whim killed 3 people. I needed to live with that fact for the rest of my life. Delirious from the fever, I could barely keep my eyes open. I saw Fox sitting next to me, his form blurry in my weak state. I couldn't handle falling back asleep and hearing my daughter was gone again. "Please, kill me," I begged him in a voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react for a long time. The longer I looked, the more I noticed he was slightly different, more human. His proportions not as lanky as before. He leaned in, and I saw instead of the moss covering his face, he replaced it with torn-up fabric that was once my clothing. He didn't keep it together with glue or thread. My tired brain wondered how the heaps of cloth stayed on his head. Reaching over, he took my arm, now red and infected from the cut. It caused a jolt of pain that almost knocked me out again to rattle my bones. Lifting my hand to his covered face, Fox lifted some of the rags to reveal a mouth of sharp teeth. Without any hesitation, he took my pinky finger off in one bite. I let out a soft scream, struggling to stay awake. Letting my hand drop, his long fingers came into view, moving directly to my throat. Darkness overtook me. I died. Fox choked the life out of me. Then he gave some back. It's something beyond anything I could ever understand of how it happened. And I don't think I ever need to fully understand it. I woke up, scar on my arm, feeling better than I had in years. Aside from being stiff, my illness left me. I was still inside my tent, rain softly hitting against the outside. Looking to my side, a bundle of blankets was taking up most of the space. Peeking under them, Fox was curled up. He moved from his nest being disturbed, but didn't wake up. I left him alone, climbing out of the tent, trying to get the kinks out of my back. It was still damp, but I was glad to be in the cool air outside. A few minutes passed after I came out, and I took stock of everything. My pinky was still gone, but wound healed along with a cut on my arm. Aside from my clothing being torn apart by Fox, nothing else touched the camp while I was out of commission. I was wondering what I should do when crunching of twigs drew my attention. A pair of men stood, wearing raincoats over wet gear, both with rifles over their shoulders, unable to keep them dry. I thought I saw some chain poking out from one of their overpack bags. Each seemed as if they were camping for a long time and worn down to the bone. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked the pair, voice cracking from a dry throat. I knew who they were. Without a doubt, they trapped Fox and left him hung up in a tree to die. I wondered if I was going to run into the people who did such a thing and still didn't know how to react when it happened. "Have you seen anything strange at night?" One asked slowly while looking over my camp. I felt my hands start to shake and forced myself to keep them steady. "Nope, nothing. Terrible weather, don't you think? I'm going to pack up and leave today." I hoped I sounded casual enough. Glancing over, I saw Fox sitting up in the tent, moving around in the blanket pile, silently. From the angle, only I was the one who could see him. The 2 men looked at each other, as if trying to decide something. If Fox saw them, would he kill them? Would I let him after what they did? If we let them go back into the forest, these 2 would kill more of those creatures. I was sure of that. Whatever was in the woods, they hunted them down. And I found that I didn't care. I didn't save Fox because of what he is. I saved him to give myself a reason to keep going. He was special because I named him and made him special. They hurt him before he became that. If they left, I wouldn't go after them. But if they dared trying to harm Fox now, I wouldn't hesitate in killing them. Either they were too tired to deal with me, or I looked natural enough for them to believe my lie. "All right, take care of yourself," the older one said with a small wave of his hand. I watched as they left, still holding my breath. Fox poked out his head, covered in rags, directed towards the men who was already gone. Still not too late to go after them. Fox gave them no notice. "Do you want to go home?" I asked him, not even sure if he could understand me. When I left the woods, I took something with me. A creature that almost looks human now. I sold my house and bought a very small cabin by the lake. I figured it would be better suited for Fox being around woods. He's never spoken to me, and I've never seen what face he hides. There is still so much I don't know about the monster I carried out of those woods. The only thing I do know about him is he's now my reason to keep living. I never needed a good one, I just needed something. 5th story. The tall, pale creature in the woods. I'd say I was 6, maybe 7, and it was midday. Fairly bright out, too. I was sitting on my uncle's lap. We were out and sitting on a lawn chair. Note that it is extremely woodsy area, crammed with trees. We sat, talking and just looking around and enjoying the weather. And that was when I noticed something moving out of the corner of my eye. Me being the naturally curious child I was, I turned my head quickly to get a good look at the thing. I squinted my eyes. From what I could tell, it was extremely tall, and I mean tall. My height guess would be maybe 12 feet tall, but then again it was a decent distance away, so I could get an exact idea. But what I didn't know is that it was a skinny, bony creature. Its joints bulged out enough for me to even tell from where I was sitting. It was shaped somewhat like a person, so it was standing on 2 legs, but its limbs and everything were abnormal to it. And it wasn't wearing any clothes, but that's the thing, the creature didn't have any genitals. It was just really weird. Hell, even 6-year-old me knew this. But I wasn't scared, not in the slightest. Matter of fact, I tried squirming out of my uncle's arms, pointing at the creature, asking him to let me go to it. He laughed, and, while looking in his direction, said, "He looks kind of like you, doesn't he?" And I furrowed my eyebrows. What's that supposed to mean? I was extremely skinny at the time, never ate much. I, however, knew for a fact I looked nothing like that. And clearly he could see the tall, looming figure slowly making his way across. This made me angrier, and I squirmed more that he wasn't letting me run to it. Tiny me eventually gave up and just watched the thing slowly walk across and into another patch of cluttered trees, where he disappeared off into. My uncle never brought up the experience again, neither did I. This happened long ago, but I know what I saw, whatever it was. It's still a vibrant memory in my mind. My childhood was strange. I have many other weird experiences, but I decided to start with one of the first. To this day, I still wish I could have chased it. Don't know why, but I had an overwhelming urge to run to it. Maybe then I would understand. Childhood is strange, but I think mine sits in this special category. I've always had weird stuff happen to me, or be around when it happens to others. At this point, I'd almost consider it just me having terrible luck. I've told many people around me this story, and they just always say, "Oh, you were too young to really know for sure what you saw was real." It must have been, surely? I mean, hell, my uncle even saw it. 6th story. The Goatman of Lake Elmore. Growing up among the rolling, green hills of Vermont meant that I spent a lot of time outdoors. Even though I lived in the capital city of Montpelier, my choice of activities had always been camping, hiking, and swimming. Most of my outdoors memories are happy, but there was one experience I had that made me almost never go camping again. My cousin Corey and I were on summer vacation from high school, and we begged my mom to take us to our favorite campground for a few days. The next afternoon, we arrived at Lake Elmore State Park, where a ranger gave us a map with available sites circled on it, and we quickly picked on and settled in. Our first night was uneventful. Since it was the middle of the week, the park was almost deserted, which meant that Corey and I never had to wait for paddle boats to become available, and we got prime lake beach spots without having to get there early in the morning. The trip was perfect until the second night. My mom wanted to go home on the second day to check on my brother Nate, who hadn't wanted to come with us, so after dinner she left. We knew she wouldn't be back until around midnight, so we entertained ourselves by making esmores and playing card games. After a while, we got restless and decided to walk down to the lake. From the bulk of the sites, the lake is about a 10-minute walk, and Mount Elmore, which rises above the lake, is always beautiful at sunset. We made it down to the lake shore just fine, and we enjoyed the cool sensation of wet sand squishing between our toes as we built a sandcastle. The sun was beginning to set in earnest, and we hadn't brought a lantern down with us, so we headed back to the site to grab one. I was eager to head back to the lake, but Corey suggested that we walk the trail that goes to the old fire tower at the top of Mount Elmore instead. I agreed, and we made our way to the outskirts of the campground where the trail started. An hour or so went by as we walked and talked, just enjoying the refreshing night air. The lantern gave us enough light that we didn't feel nervous, and we made sure not to go off the trail. There was only one path for most of the trek, so it was easy to follow. At one point, a herd of deer came bounding out of the woods near us, their appearance so sudden that I nearly dropped the lantern. Corey, now a bit spooked, asked if we could head back to camp. I wasn't really ready to, but I wanted him to be comfortable, so I agreed. We had been walking back towards the trailhead for about 5 minutes when we heard someone in the woods off to our right. It was clearly a person, since their rhythmic footsteps had a 1-2 pattern. It wasn't unusual for rangers to patrol the trails even at night, and if one of them had seen us, they were probably checking to make sure we weren't doing anything illegal or destructive. We waited for them to appear, but the steps had stopped, and no one entered the circle of light we were in. After a minute, Corey asked who was there, his voice quivering slightly. I thought it was a little odd that we couldn't see a flashlight by then, but I shrugged it off and kept walking. If some weirdo wanted to be creeping around in the woods at 10 p.m. without a light, then that was their business, not mine. It was probably someone sneaking away from their family to smoke or drink, which could easily explain why they weren't coming forward or greeting us if they thought we would report them. As we walked, I noticed that, since the appearance of the deer, the woods had seemed oddly silent. I can admit that by then I was glad that we were heading back to camp. We were about halfway down the trail when a voice called out to us, which we instantly recognized as my mom's. The sound had come from behind us, though, and Corey and I spun around in unison. I shouted out a confused-sounding greeting, but got no response. Corey looked at me, concern clear on his face. It made sense that it had been my mom in the woods, since she was probably trying to get us back for all of the pranks we had pulled over the years. Even so, it was a bit unnerving that she suddenly wasn't responding after just having called to us, and she wasn't known for dragging pranks out. We waited for several minutes, occasionally calling out to her. I started to get mad, because by then the situation wasn't funny anymore, and I was becoming worried. A few more minutes went by, and I was finally fed up. I grabbed Corey by the elbow and began to march back to camp, grumbling about annoying mothers and stupid pranks. Corey hadn't said a word, but I noticed him watching the woods around us carefully. As we reached the last 10-minute stretch of the trail, my mother's voice once again rang out behind us. It sounded wrong this time, and I immediately thought she might be hurt. I spun around, the swinging lantern casting distorted shadows. I couldn't see anything but trees, and I didn't hear anyone moving around. I was slowly becoming scared, and I just wanted to get back to the safety of the campfire. My attention was drawn to the lantern light reflecting off of something in a bush nearby. It was a pair of eyes, but to my confusion, they were about 7 feet off the ground. No animal around here could be standing that tall, even on back legs. What the hell? Corey echoed my confusion. We were both staring at this towering shadow, neither of us daring to move. After a moment, it stepped towards us, and our feeble hope that it was just a deer on its back legs was smashed. To this day, we still don't know exactly what we saw, but the word Goatman is the best way I have of describing it. A pair of woolly legs and a fuzzy abdomen gave way to smooth, humanoid chest and arms. The face was horrifying, a mix of goat and man that still haunts me. I watched as it opened its mouth, my mother's voice coming cheerily from it, but the sound was warped and too deep. "Hi, baby girl. Good morning, Lonnie." To this day, I don't remember getting back to the campsite. I remember screaming and running as fast as I could away from the creature, but that's it. I don't know if it followed us or tried to communicate further, and I'm not sure that I want to know. We never did tell my mom or the park rangers about our encounter. We figured that they would tell us we were crazy or chalk our experience up to the use of recreational substances, so it wasn't worth the hassle. Corey and I have both returned to Elmore since then, but neither of us has ever seen or heard the creature. I've often wondered if we imagined the whole thing, or if it was some sort of weird dream. People don't usually share the exact same dream, though, right? 7th story. The man I saw while I was camping. Every year, I go on an annual camping trip. I always go alone. It is one of my favorite trips of the year. smelling the fresh air, picking all the edible berries I can find. It always makes me feel like I am one with nature. Last weekend, I went on my annual camping trip, but something different happened. I did the usual berry picking, fly fishing, and just laying out in an open field, but at nighttime, my usual routine was interrupted. Now, when I say I go alone on these trips, I mean I am the only human, but I always bring my dog, Caesar, just to keep me company. Well, I went to bed business as usual, and it remained that way for about 4 hours. Then, around 2 a.m., I was awoken to Caesar growling. It wasn't a revealing growl, or one that was meant to scare any predators. It was a growl that was slowly digressing into a cry. When I woke up, I checked my phone to see the time, and figured Caesar just needed to go out or something, so I began to put my clothes on to take him out of the tent. But that is when I noticed he was staring at something. He was staring so intently, so focused, like he knew something was where it was not supposed to be. I peered out the small mesh window in my tent to see what all the fuss was about. When I saw that my fire from the evening was now active, I put that fire out. There was no doubt in my mind. What the hell? I thought, and began to reach for my tent's zipper when Caesar nudged my hand with his nose. I looked back at the fire and observed it closer. That when I saw him, it was a man maybe 5 feet 10 inches and probably about 45 years old. He was just sitting on a log right next to my fire. I don't know how I missed him. I must have been too focused on the fire to notice him, but I saw him now, and he didn't see me. I began to observe him, curious but also cautious. I wanted to believe that he was just a guy, cooking a meal and camping like I was, and he just thought this camp was idle. After a couple of minutes of observing him, I decided it was okay to get up and go talk to him, just to let him know I was there too. That's when he began whispering. It wasn't to anyone in particular, and I couldn't make out a word of what he was saying, but he was whispering. No one was around him. He was talking to himself. After noticing this, I stopped myself from opening the tent and decided to observe him closer than I had before. I began to notice how he moved. It was different than a normal human's movements. His head twitched almost like he was a squirrel, always on guard, ready to pounce whenever. This fast twitching and solo whispering got me on edge. There was just something off about this man. As I was watching him, Caesar hit the side of the tent, and the tent began to make a rustling sound. The man looked over immediately, and once again, not like the normal human. When he noticed someone else was with him, he turned immediately towards our tent, way faster than any human head I've ever seen. And the weirdest part was, he went from not knowing I was near him to making direct eye contact with me. When the tent moved, he turned and looked at me, not the tent, not Caesar, but me, straight in the eyes. I was immobilized with fear. I didn't know what to do, and that when he smiled. Similar to all of his other mannerisms, his smile was not like any other human's. He smiled from ear to ear, with out-of-place white teeth that didn't match his dirty exterior. The man turned the rest of his body, keeping his head that was at first twisted backwards completely still, so that his whole body was now facing me. He stood up and made this weird pose. I would compare it to someone trying to mock a chimpanzee in a zoo. He had both of his feet spread out far too wide, and his arms followed suit. And in this unnatural pose, he hobbled over to my tent. I was paralyzed with fear. I thought in my head, run and take Caesar with you. But I just couldn't bring myself to move. The man continued until he was about 5 feet away from my tent, staring directly into my soul, with the most unnatural posture I've ever seen a human take. I guess Caesar was paralyzed with fear too, because he didn't make a sound or move a muscle. We both stood there, staring at this man, hoping for God knows what, just that the situation would end somehow. Finally, after what felt like 10 minutes, the man began to laugh like a child full of glee, like a daughter on Christmas morning who got the American Girl doll she wanted, like a son who got to play ball with his dad that he hasn't seen in 2 months. It was one of the most gleeful laughs I've ever heard, and the worst part was it was out of key. This was a fully grown man with a laugh that resembled a 7-year-old. He then stood upright, maintained his grin, and walked away out of our sight. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night, and in the morning I walked down to my car much faster than I normally do. Caesar and I packed up and headed home. This man has been haunting me. I don't think he's actually at my house, but I can't tell anymore. I live alone. It's just Caesar and I see this man in my dreams. And when I wake up screaming, I look out my window, and there he is again, with that same posture and that same psychotic smile. Thank a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.